the time of revelation. And we find that these group of people, after they submit toward the Holy Quran and they submit toward the prophetic teachings, they go toward a group of idol worshippers and they begin to strike their idols and they begin to kick them and they begin to laugh at those who worship these rocks and so on and so forth. At this moment, the revelation came to the Holy Prophet that tell these individuals that they should not go and abuse the gods of these people. Why? Because they will come back and they will insult your God. If you want to bring people toward truth, again, truth meaning all of those divine and sublime and perfect qualities, the steps that we need to make, most importantly, is to make sure that we use good, positive language, words of encouragement, as opposed to speaking with anger, with animosity about that which other people might deem as respectful or as honorable. So I'll summarize very, very quickly, again, these advices in regards to the etiquette of dialogue, specifically founded within the Islamic tradition. Firstly, that we need to recognize differences amongst one another. Number two, we need to make sure that we use good language with one another. Thirdly, that we should speak on similarities as opposed to differences. And even amongst, and fourthly and finally, even amongst those things which we differ, let us be amongst those who rather do not use aggressive language, rather use language which is attractive toward those who surround us. I will conclude with this point over here. Perhaps we can pass on to the discussion.
Thank you, Sheikh. Now I'll pass it on to Brother Lee Weissman to give his thoughts.
A little bit higher. No.
First of all, both Mabayim B'Shem Hashem, I welcome everybody in the name of God. And thank you very much to this community for welcoming me. I really appreciate it. I promise you that the Sheikh and I did not share notes before, but you're going to think maybe we did. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
No, fear doesn't. Better? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, thank you. Okay. So we did not share notes. I'd like to begin, though, with a piece of practical advice. I want to make sure that everybody goes home with one piece of practical advice. So when you're coming to a new community, and you want to test the quality of that new community, whether it's a church, whether it's a synagogue, whether it's a mosque, the first thing you need to do is you need to go to the parking lot. When you're in the mosque, when you're in the synagogue, when you're in the church, everybody behaves so nicely. Welcome, brother. It's so nice to see you. Please have a seat. Everything is wonderful and great. The second you step into the parking lot, right, you hear the truth, right? Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what they bought? Did you hear how much they paid? That's what you hear in the parking lot. So you can tell a community by what goes on in the parking lot. When you're looking at a spiritual leader, do not look at the spiritual leader except for the Sheikh when he speaks beautifully. Right? When he's speaking beautifully, you say, ah, beautiful. What incredible football. Right? Beautiful. What you want to look for is what he looks like when somebody disagrees with him. That's where you see the quality. Anybody who has been around spiritual people for a while knows people who are incredibly spiritual. They're incredibly high. They're incredibly noble. And they have such grace until the moment that somebody disagrees with them, and at that moment, they lose it completely, and they become venom-dripping snakes. We all have met people like that, and that's really the, in a way, the crux of what we're here to talk about tonight. How to make things better for what to look for in our spiritual leaders and ourselves, whether it's in the parking lot or whether it's in here. I'm going to agree with the Sheikh on many things. So at the very beginning, you're going to hear a lot of repetition. So I'd like to begin by saying that the first key to interpersonal dialogue, according to the Jewish tradition, are things which I would call hitzoniut, things which are called externals, simple things, smiling, In Jewish tradition, we're commanded to greet everybody with a smile, speaking gently. We know that the time of the Talmud, that many of the rabbis spoke so gently they had to have special translators to be able to speak out for them because they couldn't bring themselves to speak loudly, to speak gently. To be careful about derision of any kind. It is, in Jewish tradition, it's absolutely forbidden to deride another person, whether it's in the form of outright mockery, whether it's a nickname, even if it's a nickname that's positive. Except for the case of my daughter, I call her Shorty. Maybe I should call her Shorty. Think about that one. But really, to avoid, and certainly to avoid any kind of profane language, anything which is going to be crude language. Right? The tongue is shaped like a sword for a reason. Okay? It cuts both ways. It is, as the Sheikh said, the most destructive organ that you have, and also, of course, the most creative. We know that the world is created through speech. We have an incredible creative power. We have to be very, very respectful of that power. Respectful both in the negative sense and in the positive sense. Second thing that I wrote here, you can see, it's true, is respect for individuality. Respect for individuality. The Torah says, and I need to explain this carefully because it's easily misunderstood. The Torah says that man was created in the image of God. And when I say that, I do not, God forbid, mean in any kind of physical way. It means that man has a potential to be godlike. So the Talmud says a beautiful thing. It says that when a king mints coins, right? When a king makes coins, when the government makes coins, each of the coins looks exactly the same. Each one has the same face on it. It says, but when God minted coins, that would be us. He made each one of us different. He made each face different, each personality different. And most importantly, he made each person's ideas different. The Rabbi, a famous rabbi in the 18th century, said that just as you wouldn't walk into a room and ask people to change their face, can you imagine walking into the room and saying, you know what, I'm not sure about your face. Your face, could you please change it for me because I don't like it? He said the same way, you don't walk up to somebody and say, change your entire way of thinking. I just don't like the way you think. The fact is that each person approaches the world and sees the world through completely different lenses. Your job is to be able to understand the lenses through which they see the world, not for you to try to change the way they see the world. Give the benefit of the doubt. Hebrew dan l'chasku, to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. That when you don't understand somebody, don't presume. If you hear something that doesn't make sense to you, hear something that seems contrary to you, hear something that seems negative to you, step back. Pause. Assume that you don't understand. Assume that the person is really saying something right and you haven't heard it correctly. Right? Take the step back to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Now here's where I'm going to go into an area I think is a little bit different from where the Sheikh went. The truth is that we know that in the real world, and certainly we see in the world around us, in our communities, in our families, that dialogue is not always so nice and nice. It is often a very, very difficult process, but it's also an incredibly creative process. Through dialogue, and even through dispute and through argument, we learn a tremendous amount. Now, in the Jewish tradition, argument has a peculiar place. Our entire Talmud, which is the recording of the oral law, is a recording of 600 years of discussion and debate and argument. And we know that even in our own communities, that in the best of times, having an argument, having a dialogue, having even a dispute can be extraordinarily productive. So I want to talk today about what makes a dispute productive. In Hebrew, the expression is a machloket shekayemet, an argument that endures. It's an interesting wording, because you would think from the wording it says only an argument which is the name of heaven shall endure. That's a Mishnah. It's one piece of oral law of Jewish tradition. What does that mean? It says endures, it sounds like it lasts forever, right? It says no. The commentaries explain it doesn't mean it lasts forever, but has a continuing good effect. You might want to translate it as it's worth the trouble. Only certain arguments are worth the trouble. So I want to talk about what makes an argument worth the trouble, and what makes an argument productive, and what makes an argument not productive. So to begin with, it's the subject. Arguing about something important. There are a lot of things about which it is simply not important to argue. I was very proud of my daughter that her first word in the world was the word okay. It's great as that. How great is that? Some of us are born that way. Very few of us are born that way. Most of us, we argue all the time about things that just do not matter. So the first thing to ask yourself when you find yourself in a dispute, and it's moving from dialogue to dispute, then you say to yourself, does it matter? So first talk about things which matter. Second is the motive. And I'll say this as clearly as I possibly can. The desire to be right is the greatest enemy of truth. The moment you have an argument and you are just trying to be right, you need to stop. At that moment, you need to stop. You need to back down. The desire to be right, and many of us fall into this. I fall into it almost every day. I'm a high school teacher. I have to be right. They pay me to be right. The desire to be right is dangerous. The desire to make a name for yourself. The desire of your own ego. You need to check yourself. This is the beauty of this is really that this is a challenge for a personality. It's a challenge for who you are. In those moments when you find yourself in dispute and you manage to turn it into dialogue, right? Amazing things will happen. The hardest part is the method. How is it possible to go through the world and not actually agree with everybody? And to be able to have real differences in people, and yet be able to communicate with one another. So the classic case of this is a case from Jewish history that's often cited in Jewish law, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So in the first century, there were two major schools of Jewish law. There was Beit Hillel, you understand from Arabic, Beit means the house, literally the school, you could sort of say the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And their differences were very classic. Hillel tended to be, the school of Hillel tended to be much more lenient, much more easygoing. They looked for loopholes. They looked to make life easier for people. And Shammai was exactly the opposite. Shammai looked for every possible strictness. Shammai did not worry too much about human realities, but only worried about what is the divine will. Not how that divine will would play out in human behavior, but what was the divine will. These two camps competed with each other over 312 points of law. 312 points of law, and this went on for 3 years. And the Talmud tells us that there was a time when this became very, very bitter. Now, we don't know how bitter it was. To be honest, there are two opinions. It says, there's a line in that there are two Talmuds. There's one, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud says that at one point the students of Shammai barred the door of the study hall and threatened to kill the house of Hillel, but there was no violence. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud says, on the contrary, that in fact, the students of Shammai came in with swords and began to kill the students of Hillel. That there was actually a battle, and there's arguments about the rabbis who take that literally, is it allegorical, is it but clearly there was an incredible animosity at some point between these two groups. And yet, when the Mishnah says, what is a machloket, what is a debate that is worth it, it says the debate between Hillel and Shammai. Strange. It has to do with what happened after. What characterized this debate? Now, first of all, add another piece to this. The Talmud tells us that in the time of Hillel and Shammai, it was as if there were two Torahs. It was as if there were two Torahs. That's a very interesting comment. When I first read the comment, I understood it as saying, they had such differences about the law. There was as if there were two completely different communities doing completely different things. And yet, when I look at the 312 distinctions between these two schools, I find out that they're very, very small. They're over tiny, tiny, tiny little points of law. There would have been, practically speaking, very little difference between them. So what does it mean that it was as if there were two Torahs? It was because they were looking at each other and saying, your Torah is different than mine. Your Torah is different than mine. It was not a matter of fact, it was a matter of attitude. They had come to the point where they had ceased to maybe see each other even as being part of the same camp, as being both B'nai Torah, as children of the Torah. But the breach was here. And the description is beautiful, beautiful in the end. In the end, the Sanhedrin decided to rule on the side of Hillel. Decided to rule on the side of Hillel, that nearly all the decisions would go according to the side of Hillel, according to the more lenient. So you might think, okay. So obviously this is a vote for leniency. But not true. The Talmud explains in a beautiful way. It says, well, why did we go for Hillel? Why is it we went for Hillel? It says, because of the process through which they went through. They said, in truth, Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Each of these are the words of living God. Shammai was not wrong. Shammai was looking from a certain perspective. Shammai was looking from the perspective of the divine will, and from the perspective of the divine will, they were right. Hillel was looking from the perspective of human reality, and how human reality relates to divine will. They were right. Both sides were right. What made the difference was the process through which Hillel argued. And there were really only two pieces of it, two beautiful pieces. So one piece was that Hillel always stated the argument of Shammai before their own. Always stated the argument of Shammai for their own. That is, before they would state their opinion, they would say, the house of Shammai says, and they would explain the opinion in such a way that the students of Shammai would nod and say, yes, you got me. You understand our position. Then they would argue. This, for you any psychologists in the bunch here? Any therapists? No therapist? How come you go there? Unbelievable. Okay, well, if there were a therapist here, they would immediately recognize this as reflection. Powerful tool in therapy, powerful tool in marriage counseling. My wife's a marriage counselor. A powerful tool in our relationships with people. People want to know that you understand what they're saying. So when somebody says to you, boy, I've really had a hard day, you can say, you know what? It sounds like you really had a hard day. It sounds silly to say it, but people want to be heard. People desperately want to be heard. So in the case of Shammai, just simply, and I offer you this as a take-home exercise, try this at home. When you're having a discussion or having a disagreement, having some kind of a dispute, state the other person's argument in such a way that they know that you get them. So that was the first part. The second part is that Hillel and Shammai together never lost personal relationships with one another. They left the arguments in the study hall. They married each other's daughters, or sons. I guess you can't have daughters. They married each other's daughters and sons. They had business relationships with each other. They lived in the same neighborhoods. They went to the same celebrations. They went to each other's funerals. At the moment that we stop doing that, at the moment that we allow our differences to stop us from that, from going to each other's funerals, from marrying each other's children, from celebrating each other's happinesses, at that point we're really in danger. Really in danger. So lastly, I want to share just one more verse, and I think that I also want to add that by not severing those ties with people, by really being careful about not severing those ties with people, we create a safety. We create a kind of safety for people to be able to disagree. And I remember I said at the beginning that there's creativity in disagreement. But that creativity only takes place when there's safety. When we know that at the end of the discussion we're going to be friends. So I want to share an interesting verse. So there is also a concept, and I'm sure there's a concept like this in Islam, of the obligation to admonish somebody when they're doing something wrong. Fact is that being part of a community, being part of a family, being part of the faculty of a high school, or being part of a board of directors, is that sometimes you have to tell people that they're wrong. So the Torah offers a very interesting verse, and I'll read, it's a series of 3 verses. It says, "Do not hate your brother in your heart. You must admonish your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. Do not take revenge nor bear a grudge against the children of your people. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. I am God." You notice something very interesting here. You must admonish your neighbor is sandwiched between a command not to hate and a commandment to love. And there's a warning that comes after it. You must admonish your neighbor and not bear a sin because of him. There are 2 meanings to that. One meaning is, it says, if you don't admonish the person, maybe you become complicit in their sin. That's one possibility. The other possibility is, if you admonish the person, you may sin in the process of admonishing them. If you speak harshly to them, if you insult them, if you hurt them, then it becomes on you. Then it becomes your sin. So really, admonish, criticize, disagree, but don't sin in the process of doing so. That's really the message. The great sage, Rabbi advised us that whenever we teach Torah, we should end with a prayer to transform our Torah into prayer. In this case, I'll be transforming everything into prayer. So I'd like to ask Ribono Shel Olam, Ya Rab Alamin, to please help us to fulfill the best of our intentions, to help us to control our tongues, to help us to see everybody that we know as individuals and to respect their individuality, to respect them for all that they deserve to be respected for us to be able to engage in dialogue and not in dispute, for us to have only arguments, disputes, dialogues which are really productive and which are going to bring more beauty and more truth to the world, to free us from the desire to be right, to free us from our egos and from our pride, and keep us from being able to actually really hear what other people say, and to give us all the peace to be able to enjoy all God's blessings.
Amen.